The voice sliced through the humid afternoon air, as sharp and cold as shattered glass. "Step away from the vehicle. Now!" He stood silhouetted against the sun, a figure of absolute authority in the sprawling parking lot of an upscale shopping mall. His hand rested on his holstered weapon, not as a threat, but as a fact. Before him stood a woman, her hands slowly rising in a gesture of weary compliance, and between them, a pristine, classic car, a piece of automotive art gleaming under the oppressive sun, the object of his sudden, unshakable suspicion. "I know you didn't buy this car." It wasn't an accusation. It was a verdict already delivered. Around them, the Saturday afternoon buzz of commerce faltered. Shoppers stopped. A circle began to form, a silent audience to a drama that was all too familiar. And then, one by one, the phones came out, their lenses like 100 unblinking eyes, all ready to bear witness. "Hands on the hood," he commanded, his voice a bark that echoed between the luxury sedans. "This vehicle matches a stolen car report." As she obeyed, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder to the hot asphalt, a leather portfolio on the passenger seat caught the light. Its official seal, a symbol of a power he could not comprehend, was just barely visible. What the officer couldn't see was the storm brewing just miles away, a crisis that her forced absence was about to ignite. What he couldn't know was that he wasn't just confronting a citizen, he was challenging an institution. This happened in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses, in your city, in your neighborhood. What would you have done? Would you have pulled out your phone and hit record? Let us know in the comments below. For more stories that expose the truth, make sure to like this video and share it. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment that matters. The Saturday air hung thick and heavy over Houston, a suffocating blanket of heat and humidity that made the asphalt of the Galleria's parking lot shimmer like a black lake. It was a day for air-conditioned sanctuaries, for the cool attrudier's sterile scent of department stores and the clinking of ice in overpriced sodas. Amidst the rows of silver sedans and white SUVs, the 1967 Ford Mustang sat like a sapphire dropped on a slab of granite. It was a creature of a different era, its nightfall blue paint drinking in the sun, its chrome trim sharp enough to cut the hazy air. Officer Mark Mitchell's patrol car idled at the end of the aisle, the AC fighting a losing battle. He watched the woman shut the driver's side door. The sound was a solid, satisfying thunk, a sound of heavy steel and meticulous engineering. His eyes, trained by 12 years of sorting the city's chaos into neat boxes of right and wrong, began their silent, automatic calculus. He saw the car first, a collector's piece, an auction-block trophy worth more than his house. Then he saw her. The blazer was a simple, dark navy, but the fabric hung in a way that spoke of quality he couldn't name. The jeans were unremarkable, but it was the shoes that snagged his attention. A pair of dark leather loafers, well worn at the heels, the kind of comfortable, expensive footwear a person buys for life. The pieces didn't fit. The car and the woman were a discordant narrative. His mind felt an immediate, professional obligation to correct. He thought, patterns. It's all about seeing the patterns. 12 years on the force teaches you what belongs and what doesn't. This doesn't belong. This is a loose thread you pull before the whole city unravels. The quiet hum of the Saturday shoppers, the distant rumble of traffic, it all faded into a low buzz. This was the moment. The break in the pattern. He put the cruiser in park and stepped out, the sudden wave of heat washing over him. He didn't hurry. He let the sight of his uniform, of his deliberate, measured approach, do the initial work for him. He moved with a predator's economy, circling wide around the front of the Mustang, giving her time to notice him, to feel the weight of his presence. He saw the flicker of awareness in her eyes as she turned from locking the door. She wasn't startled, just observant. He came to a stop a few feet away, leaving a careful bubble of space between them. "Afternoon, ma'am," he began, his voice pitched to a tone of feigned, folksy curiosity. "This is quite a vehicle. Don't see many of them around here, especially not during peak shopping hours. You visiting someone in the area? Eleanor Washington registered the question for exactly what it was. Her mind, a place of disciplined legal architecture, immediately deconstructed his approach. He led with the car, not a traffic violation, no broken taillight, no expired registration sticker he could possibly see. This is a fishing expedition. He wasn't enforcing a law. He was investigating a suspicion born from a single glance. She saw the potential pathways of the conversation fork in front of her, most of them leading to escalation. Her indignation was a sharp, hot thing, but she walled it off. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. The goal was de-escalation. Calibrate your response, Eleanor. Don't be the target he wants you to be. She turned to face him fully, her expression neutral, her hands loosely at her sides. Officer, is there a problem with my parking job? I believe I'm within the lines. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the quiet resonance of a courtroom, devoid of the defensiveness or fear he expected. The politeness, the procedural redirect, was like a splash of gasoline on a spark. It was wrong. It didn't fit the pattern of someone who was caught off guard. It felt practiced, defiant. As she spoke, Mark Mitchell's right hand moved from his side and came to rest, almost casually, on the hard polymer grip of his holstered sidearm. It wasn't a threat of a draw, not yet. It was a statement, a nonverbal reminder of the power dynamic he was there to enforce. Eleanor's eyes noted the movement, cataloged it, but she gave no outward sign that she'd seen it. She didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. She simply waited. Her composure was the final piece of evidence he needed. In his mind, her refusal to be intimidated was an admission of guilt. Her calm, intelligent response wasn't the behavior of a law-abiding citizen. It was the practiced maneuvering of someone with something to hide. A black woman, in clothes too plain for a car this grand, with a voice too steady for a confrontation with the law. The conclusion solidified in his mind, hard and certain as the concrete beneath his feet. She couldn't possibly own this car. His posture straightened, his chin lifted, the pretense of casualness vanished, burned away by the certainty of his prejudice. His voice, when it came again, was louder, sharper, designed to carry, to command attention from anyone within earshot. This vehicle is worth more than you make in 5 years, he stated, his voice cutting through the humid air like a blade. He took a half step closer, invading the bubble of space between them. So, let's start with the truth. His accusation, echoing between the luxury cars, was a stone thrown into the quiet lake of the shopping afternoon, and the ripples began to spread immediately. The first effect was silence, a brief, unnatural pause as nearby shoppers, laden with bags from Neiman Marcus and Saks, stopped mid-stride. Heads turned. The ambient murmur of conversation died, replaced by a focused, electric curiosity. Then came the second effect, the slow, deliberate raising of Eleanor Washington's hands. She moved not with the jerky panic of the guilty, but with the weary, measured grace of someone accepting an unavoidable absurdity. The gesture was a shield and a surrender all at once, a signal to the world that she would not escalate, that she would be the calm center of the storm he was creating. As her hands rose to shoulder height, the circle of onlookers began to tighten. Phones, like metallic extensions of their hands, emerged from pockets and purses. A man in his 50s, wearing a golf shirt and a thick gold watch, nudged his wife. "See? That's what I'm talking about," he said, his voice a low grumble of satisfaction. "Driving a car like that, she's practically asking for trouble." A few feet away, a younger woman, her face etched with concern, whispered to her friend, "Look at his hand. It's on his gun. She hasn't even moved. This feels wrong." The parking lot was no longer just a space for commerce. It had become a theater, and the audience was choosing sides. Mark Mitchell saw her slow, elegant gesture not as compliance, but as mockery. He needed fear. He needed frantic denial. Her composure felt like a challenge to his authority. He needed to reassert control. "Place your hands on the hood," he barked, the command sharp and authoritative. "This vehicle matches a stolen car report." He had thrown out the official-sounding bait, a procedural justification he could lean on later. The lie felt solid, comfortable in his mouth. It was the lie that did it. Across the aisle, standing near a white Lexus, college student Chloe Johnson felt a familiar, sickening lurch in her stomach. Not again, she thought, the memory sharp and bitter. "I saw this happen to my uncle last year. They pulled him out of his own car, right in his own driveway. They said he fit a description." Her phone was already in her hand, its smooth glass cool against her trembling fingers. "I'm not just going to stand here." With 3 quick taps, her screen came to life. She opened the app, her thumb hovering over the red button. As Eleanor complied, her designer handbag sliding from her shoulder and landing softly on the hot asphalt, Chloe pressed "Go Live." The world filtered through her phone's lens was now being broadcast. A small icon with a number appeared in the corner of her screen. 87. It jumped to 142, then 319. Faster than she could process, the numbers began to climb, a silent, digital testament to the unfolding drama. Mitchell, scanning the growing audience, caught the movement. His eyes locked onto Chloe's phone, and he recognized the interface, the telltale red live indicator in the corner. A muscle in his jaw tightened. His entire posture shifted, hardening. He was no longer just a cop dealing with a suspect. He was on stage. The audience was no longer just a dozen shoppers. It was a vast, unseen world behind that tiny lens. He deliberately raised his voice for his next command, performing for the cameras he now knew were watching. He thought, "Fine. Let them watch. Let them all see what real policing looks like. They want a show. I'll give them one. This is how you maintain order." Eleanor, her hands now pressed against the warm, sun-baked metal of her father's car, began to speak, her voice still impossibly level. "Officer, I can explain everything." "No, ma'am." He cut her off, the words sharp as broken glass. He turned his body slightly, presenting a more authoritative profile to the recording phones. "You'll explain to the detectives. Right now, I need to see registration, insurance, and proof of purchase." His demand hung in the humid air, a naked challenge. Eleanor did not move, her hands still flat against the hood, feeling the metal warm beneath her palms. She was a statue of forced composure, a silent testament to a system that had, in this moment, turned on itself. The silence stretched, amplifying the soft clicks of phone cameras and the distant, incongruous music drifting from the mall entrance. It was a silence waiting to be broken, and it was not broken by her. From the edge of the assembled spectators, a figure detached herself from the passive ring of onlookers. It was an elderly black woman, her face a roadmap of dignified years, her steps slow but unwavering. She pushed through the gawking bystanders with a quiet authority, her eyes fixed not on the spectacle, but on Eleanor's face, a flicker of pained recognition in them. As she neared the invisible line Mitchell had drawn with his presence, she spoke, her voice clear and caring, untouched by the tremor of age. "Excuse me, officer, I think you might be making a mistake." Mitchell's head snapped toward the new voice, his irritation palpable. He saw her, gray hair, church dress, determined expression, and dismissed her instantly as a meddler. "That woman, the woman, Mrs. Helen Hayes," continued, gesturing with her chin toward Eleanor. "She's a respected member of our community. I know her family." "Ma'am, step back," Mitchell warned, not even bothering to look away from Eleanor. His focus was singular. "This is official police business. Stay back or you will be interfering." Mrs. Hayes hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line of frustration. but she held her ground, retreating a single step as a concession. In that moment of standoff, a sharp vibration started against Eleanor's hip. Buzz! 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 The pattern was insistent, urgent. She didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. The Chief Justice, the emergency conference, her vote. The silent, private pressure mounted, a stark contrast to the loud, public humiliation she was enduring. She couldn't answer, not with her hands pressed against the warm metal of her father's car. A silent prisoner in a theater of prejudice. The growing commotion had attracted another form of authority. A man in a crisp, light blue security uniform approached, his movements cautious, his name tag reading David Rodriguez. He looked from Mitchell's rigid posture to Eleanor's calm submission, to the dozens of phones pointed like an accusing firing squad. This was far beyond the scope of teenage shoplifters or lost children. This was a liability in the making. Officer, Rodriguez began, his voice professional but strained. Is everything under control here? Mall management is getting concerned about the disruption. Before Mitchell could offer a curt dismissal, a new sound sliced through the afternoon air, a sound that instantly changed the texture of the scene, the approaching wail of sirens. It wasn't the frantic, high-pitched scream of a chase, but the deep, resonant whoop of backup arriving with purpose. 2 more HPD patrol cars swung into the parking aisle, their blue and red lights painting the faces of the crowd in strobing, anxious hues. They parked at angles, boxing in the Mustang, transforming a traffic stop into a full-blown blockade. The doors of the first car opened, and Sergeant John Reynolds emerged. He was a man in his late 50s, his face weathered, his movements economical. 23 years on the force had sanded away any unnecessary motion. He took in the entire scene in a single, sweeping glance. The pristine classic car, the well-dressed woman, the aggressive posture of his officer, and the sea of phones. From the second car, a younger officer, Sarah Torres, stepped out. Her approach was different, equally cautious, but her eyes immediately went to the crowd, assessing the digital threat as much as the physical one. Reynolds walked directly to his subordinate. He ignored the cameras, his focus entirely on Mitchell. "Mark, talk to me," he said, his voice quiet, a low counterpoint to Mitchell's earlier shouting. It was the calm voice of a man who had seen 100 situations like this go sideways. "What was the initial probable cause? Did you run the plates before you made contact, or after?" The question, a simple procedural check, hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. While Mitchell's mind raced for a satisfactory answer, Officer Torres came to Reynolds' side. She had done her own quick assessment, not of the law, but of the landscape of modern outrage. "Sarge," she said, her voice urgent but controlled. "The live stream is already over 5,000 viewers. Hashtags are popping up. We need to control the perimeter before this becomes a media circus." Torres's information hit Reynolds like a bucket of cold water, instantly changing his calculations. This was no longer just a flawed traffic stop. It was a time bomb detonating in front of a global audience. The weight of thousands of unseen eyes pressed down on the sweltering parking lot. Every word, every gesture was now evidence in a court of public opinion that delivered its verdict in real time. The need to de-escalate became a burning urgency. He turned his attention from Mitchell, his gaze settling on the composed woman with her hands still on the hood of the Mustang. Her stillness in the center of the growing chaos was the most unsettling part of the entire scene. He took a step forward, deliberately placing himself slightly in front of Mitchell, a subtle repositioning of authority. "Ma'am," Reynolds began, his voice purposefully reasonable. "Let's clear this up. My officer has requested your documentation. If you can provide it, we can resolve this." Eleanor finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting Reynolds's. She saw in his face not the smug certainty of his partner, but the weary pragmatism of a man who understood procedure and, more importantly, liability. This was the person to address. "The documents you require are in my briefcase, on the back seat of the vehicle," she stated, her voice even. She paused, letting the statement land before adding the critical qualifier. However, I must warn you, officer, that those are confidential legal documents. The words, spoken so plainly, created a new and complex snag in the proceedings. In the silent, disciplined chambers of her mind, Eleanor was navigating a legal minefield. Attorney-client privilege, sealed judicial work product. The files in that briefcase could lead to mistrials in 3 active cases. He can't search it, but if I say confidential legal documents, he'll hear evidence I'm trying to hide. It was a perfect trap, sprung by his ignorance and her duty. She had to protect the integrity of the cases, but doing so would undoubtedly be twisted into an admission of guilt by the man whose hand still rested on his gun. She chose her next words with the precision of a surgeon. "Officer," she said, her voice now carrying a new layer of formal gravity, "I need you to understand. That briefcase contains documents that are professionally sensitive and protected under specific confidentiality statutes. A search, even a cursory one, would have serious legal ramifications that go far beyond this traffic stop." She was offering them a final off-ramp, a warning that they were trespassing into a legal territory for which they were unprepared. It was an off-ramp Mitchell refused to take. To him, her careful, articulate explanation was just more smoke. It was a lawyerly trick. He moved toward the car's rear door. "I'll retrieve them for you, ma'am. We'll be very careful." The moment had arrived. The line had been drawn. Eleanor's voice became sharp, clear, and absolute. "No, you will not." She drew herself up, as much as one could with hands on the hood of a car. "I am invoking my Fourth Amendment rights. You cannot search my vehicle or my personal effects without a warrant or probable cause." The invocation of the Constitution was the final trigger. For Mark Mitchell, this was the ultimate act of defiance, the undeniable proof of guilt that he had been seeking all along. He turned away from the car, a cold, triumphant smile touching his lips. He looked at Reynolds, his expression a clear, "I told you so," then turned his attention back to Eleanor. "Ma'am," he announced, his voice ringing with renewed authority, "you are under arrest for failure to provide proper vehicle identification and obstruction of justice." He reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click of the ratchet echoing in the tense silence. He turned to his sergeant, justifying the massive escalation he had just initiated. "See, John," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Legal ramifications. Statutes. She's talking like a cheap TV lawyer. People with nothing to hide don't talk like that. They just show you their registration." But Reynolds didn't nod in agreement. He stood his ground, his brow furrowed, the pieces not adding up. The woman's composure, her precise language, and now a specific, correct invocation of her constitutional rights, all set against the backdrop of a viral video that could ruin them all. He looked at Mitchell, then back at Eleanor. "Obstruction?" Reynolds questioned, the single word loaded with skepticism. "Tom, maybe we should—" "She's been evasive from the beginning," Mitchell interrupted, his pride stung by the challenge. He would not be undermined now, not in front of the cameras. He was the one in control. He gestured at Eleanor with the handcuffs. "Turn around." The disagreement hung between the two officers, but Mitchell's decision was made. He stepped forward, the dry click of the handcuffs echoing as he prepared to apply them to Eleanor's wrists. For him, this was the final, satisfying step in restoring order, in correcting the pattern that had bothered him from the start. He was a hammer, and he had finally found his nail. He reached for her arm, the cold metal of the cuffs glinting in the harsh sunlight. And in that instant, a burst of static erupted from the radio on his shoulder, so loud and sudden it made him flinch. "All units in Sector 4, be advised." The dispatcher's voice cut through the air, clipped and professional. It was a standard advisory, but the urgency in the tone was a hook that snagged every officer's attention. Upon hearing the transmission, John Reynolds's head, which had been turned toward Mitchell in a silent plea for reason, snapped instantly toward the rear of the blue Mustang. His eyes found the license plate. He mouthed the letters silently. A private catechism of dawning horror. J.R.W. His posture, which had been coiled with a supervisor's tension, went ramrod straight. The change was so abrupt it was as if he'd received an electric shock. He took an involuntary half-step away from Mitchell, a physical manifestation of a chasm that had just opened between them. The dispatcher's voice continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the parking lot. Courthouse security reports Judge Eleanor Washington is missing from the emergency judicial session. All patrol units be on alert for a possible welfare check or emergency situation. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Judge Eleanor Washington. Reynolds' mind reeled. The formal title. The full name. It couldn't be. He stared at the woman, at her calm, intelligent eyes, at the simple blazer, and tried to reconcile the image with the powerful figure he knew from the courthouse. Mark Mitchell, however, remained rooted in his own reality. He thought, a judge? No, just a coincidence. She's not a judge. She's a suspect who got lucky with a radio call. Stay the course. Don't let them spook you. He saw it not as a revelation, but as a distraction, a bizarre twist of fate designed to undermine his authority at the critical moment. His grip on the handcuffs remained firm. Then the dispatcher delivered the final, undeniable pieces of the puzzle. Description is an African-American female, 45 years of age, approximately 5'6", last seen wearing jeans and a dark blazer. Subject is believed to be driving a blue 1967 Ford Mustang. License plate. There was a pause, the sound of a keyboard clicking. Reads Juliet Romeo Whiskey 1967, JRRW 1967. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. John Reynolds looked from the license plate, a perfect match, to the woman in front of him, the blazer, the jeans, the calm, authoritative demeanor, her precise legal language from moments before, confidentiality statutes, Fourth Amendment rights. It all clicked into place with a sickening, horrifying clarity. The ground beneath his feet felt like it was giving way. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a career-ending, department-destroying catastrophe. He had testified in Judge Washington's courtroom. He knew her reputation for being tough, brilliant, and impeccably fair. And his officer was about to put her in handcuffs. While Reynolds was frozen in a state of dawning shock, Officer Sarah Torres had been listening, her mind processing the information with swift, practical efficiency. She had seen the license plate when they first pulled up. She had noted the woman's articulate, non-combative stance. Unlike Mitchell, she had no narrative to protect. She only had the facts, and the facts were damning. She moved quickly to Reynolds' side, her voice a low, urgent whisper meant for him alone. "Sarge," she began, her eyes wide but her tone steady. "The license plate, it's an exact match. What are your orders?" Torres's question, sharp and urgent, cut through the fog of panic in Reynolds' mind. An order. He had to give an order. For a split second, his 23 years of training warred with the primal instinct to simply make it all go away. But there was no away. There was only here, this sweltering parking lot, with a global audience watching, waiting to see what he would do. The path of least resistance, backing Mitchell's play, was now the path to certain ruin. He had only one choice left. He turned to his junior officer, his face a mask of grim resolve. The quiet, questioning tone was gone, replaced by the unmistakable iron of command. "Tom," he said, his voice low but carrying an absolute finality that cut through Mitchell's zealous focus. "Stand down. Let her get her identification." Mark Mitchell froze, his hand still holding the open handcuffs inches from Eleanor's wrist. "Sarge, she's obstructing." "I said stand down," Reynolds repeated, his voice dropping even lower, imbued with a cold fury that Mitchell had not heard in years. "That's a direct order. Step back. Now." The challenge was so direct, so absolute that Mitchell's body reacted before his mind could. He took a reflexive step backward, the handcuffs still dangling from his fingers like a broken toy. His face was a canvas of confusion and wounded pride. He had lost control. A profound stillness fell over the scene, with the immediate threat of the handcuffs removed. Eleanor slowly, deliberately, lowered her hands from the hood of the car. Every movement was precise and economical, broadcasting calm. She turned, her back to the officers, and opened the rear door of the Mustang. The entire crowd, 100 strangers and dozens of phone lenses, held a collective breath. Their focus narrowed on her hands as she reached inside and lifted a sleek, dark leather briefcase onto the seat. She placed it with care, aimed the clasps toward herself, and opened it. Her hands moved past neatly arranged files, their colored tabs hinting at a world of structured order, and retrieved a matching leather portfolio. She closed the briefcase, turned back to face the officers, and held the portfolio in both hands. The snap of its clasp opening was the only sound in the parking lot, sharp and definitive as a gavel's strike. She opened the portfolio. As she did, the afternoon sun, which had been a source of oppressive heat, became an instrument of revelation. It caught the edge of a golden, embossed seal on an official-looking ID card, and for a breathtaking moment, the light was almost blinding. The bustling noise of the parking lot, the distant traffic, the nervous whispers, it all seemed to fall away, creating a pocket of absolute reverent silence around the three officers and the woman who stood before them. With a steady hand, she tilted the portfolio forward. Nestled against the cream-colored interior was a judicial identification card. The seal of the Harris County Civil Courthouse, Texas, was unmistakable. Her photograph, professional and composed, stared out from the card. Her name was printed below it in stark, black letters. The realization rippled through the nearest onlookers first. A wave of audible gasps. "Whoa!" a young man in a baseball cap exclaimed, his phone dipping for a second in his shock. "Did you see that? That was a judge's ID." Chloe Johnson, her hands trembling slightly, zoomed her phone's camera in, capturing the details of the card. Her voice was a mixture of awe and fierce vindication as she narrated to the thousands watching her live stream. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You guys are not going to believe this. She's a judge. The officer who was about to arrest her, she's a judge." The comment section on her screen, already a torrent, became an unreadable waterfall of text. After letting the visual evidence sink in, after allowing the crowd to become her herald, Eleanor finally spoke. She looked directly at Mark Mitchell, her voice devoid of triumph or anger. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet, unshakable authority she wielded daily from her elevated bench. "Officer Mark Mitchell," she began, the use of his full name making it clear that she had been observing him just as closely as he had been observing her. "Badge number 4847, I am Judge Eleanor Washington of the Harris County Civil Courthouse, Criminal Division." The words, clear and precise, landed in the center of Mark Mitchell's world and shattered it into a million pieces. The hand that held the handcuffs went completely limp, falling to his side as if the bones had turned to dust. The metal cuffs clinked softly, once, against the button on his pocket, a tiny, pathetic sound that marked the end of his certainty. The confident, condescending smirk that had been his primary expression moments before dissolved, melting away to reveal a slack-jawed, ashen pallor. His eyes were fixed on the ID card, on the golden seal, on the photograph of the woman he had just tried to arrest. He saw it all, but his mind, so quick to create a narrative of guilt based on prejudice, was utterly incapable of processing the overwhelming, undeniable reality of the truth. The silence that fell over the parking lot was absolute, heavier and more suffocating than the afternoon heat. Eleanor Washington let it hang there, letting the full weight of the truth settle over every person watching. She was no longer a suspect. She was the judge. With a soft click, she closed the leather portfolio and held it at her side. Her gaze, which had been patient and observant, now became sharp and penetrating as it settled on Mark Mitchell. "You saw a black woman with an expensive car. Officer Mitchell," she began, her voice calm but infused with a chilling precision. "And from those two facts alone, you constructed a narrative of guilt. You made an assumption based on prejudice, not a conclusion based on evidence." She took a single, deliberate step toward him. He flinched. "This isn't just about my father's car, Officer Mitchell. It's about a pattern. A pattern I have seen from my bench for 15 years. I've heard officers like you testify under oath, and I have seen the same flawed logic you displayed today. I've seen you write reports that twist a citizen's fear into furtive movements, and their confusion into non-compliance. I've seen you turn victims into aggressors with the stroke of a pen. I've heard testimony where he seemed nervous is used as justification for a search, where he didn't belong in the neighborhood is presented as probable cause. You are not an anomaly, officer. You are a symptom of a sickness I have dedicated my life to fighting." Her words were not an attack. They were a diagnosis. She then gestured toward the gleaming blue Mustang. "This vehicle was a gift. It was the prized possession of my father, Judge James Washington." The name, another respected judicial title, sent a fresh murmur through the crowd. "He served this county for 32 years from the very same courthouse where I now preside. He drove this car to that courthouse every single day. Its legacy is one of service to the law, not defiance of it." She let that sink in before her focus narrowed again, becoming even more intense. "But your pattern of behavior isn't just a symptom I've observed from a distance. Sometimes it has a name and a badge number." She paused, her eyes locked on his. "Your personal record, for instance, it includes 18 separate excessive force complaints filed by citizens over the past 12 years. As Eleanor spoke, the name Judge Washington finally broke through the fog of John Reynolds' shock and connected with a memory. Judge Washington, of course, the police accountability vote. The pieces began to fall into a sickening alignment. I testified in her courtroom 2 years ago on that armed robbery case. She was wearing the robes, sitting up on the bench, her hair different. I never would have made the connection. He remembered her cross-examination of the arresting officer in that case. It had been precise, relentless, and had exposed several procedural errors. He was seeing that same brilliant, analytical mind at work now. Only this time, it was directed at his own officer. 18 complaints, Eleanor repeated, her voice steady as a rock. And 2 federal civil rights lawsuits. Lawsuits that were quietly settled by the city to avoid the public spectacle of a trial. I know this. Officer Mitchell, she delivered the final devastating piece of information. I know this because I am the chair of the Judicial Committee on Police Accountability. The title landed with the force of a physical explosion. John Reynolds felt the air leave his lungs. Sarah Torres's eyes widened in disbelief. This was a nightmare from which there was no waking up. They hadn't just profiled a judge. They had profiled the one judge in the entire state of Texas responsible for overseeing their conduct, their policies, their very existence. The information crashed down upon Mark Mitchell, and his mind, already reeling, simply broke. How? The thought was a silent scream in his head. How does she know that? The lawsuits were sealed. The complaints are internal HR documents. No one is supposed to have access to that. That's private. It isn't possible. His entire framework of how the world worked, the blue wall of silence, the union protections, the administrative barriers that kept officers like him safe from true accountability, crumbled to dust in the face of her calm, absolute knowledge. It wasn't possible, and yet it was happening. Mitchell's question of how echoed in the silence of his mind, a wordless scream. But Eleanor Washington, with the insight of someone who has heard 1,000 excuses, seemed to hear it. She prepared to deliver the final answer, the piece that would complete the picture of the day's staggering irony. She held up her phone, the screen displaying a long list of missed calls from Chief Justice Catherine Thompson. "I know these things, Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice quiet but carrying with devastating weight. "Because this incident is not just an interruption of my Saturday, it is an obstruction of my judicial duty." She gestured with the phone. "The emergency judicial conference I was required to attend via teleconference from Chicago, Illinois, the one I have missed because you detained me here under false pretenses. We were scheduled to vote on a number of pressing cases." She paused, letting the implications of her words settle before she delivered the final, crushing blow. "One case in particular required my vote to break a tie. Case number 2024 CR 88847. It is your own federal civil rights lawsuit. Officer Mitchell, the plaintiff, a Miss Laura Rodriguez." The name hung in the air. Another ghost summoned to the parking lot. Mitchell's face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. The Rodriguez case, he had tried to forget it, to bury it under a mountain of paperwork and procedural delays, hoping it would simply fade away. Eleanor was not finished. "The suit alleges," she continued, her voice a clinical recitation of facts, "that you profiled Miss Rodriguez during a traffic stop in this very same shopping district 18 months ago. It alleges you made assumptions based on her race and the value of her vehicle, and that you threatened her with arrest when she asserted her constitutional rights. As it is a federal case, it falls under the jurisdiction of the Fifth Circuit. The irony, I'm sure, is not lost on you." It was at this precise moment of peak irony, as Mitchell stood completely undone, that a new sound pierced the air. It was another siren, but different from the others. A single, powerful burst from an unmarked black SUV that turned into the aisle with an authority that dwarfed the patrol cars. It glided to a stop behind the barricade. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit emerged. It was Police Commissioner Michael Hayes. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. He didn't look at Mitchell. He didn't look at Reynolds or Torres. His eyes went directly to Judge Eleanor Washington. He strode forward, his expensive shoes crunching softly on the asphalt, closing the distance between the highest level of law enforcement and the woman his department had just profoundly wronged. "Your Honor," he began, his voice deep with a respect that bordered on reverence. He stopped a respectful distance from her, inclining his head. "On behalf of the Houston Police Department, I apologize for this unconscionable violation of your rights and your dignity." He then immediately corrected himself. "Actually, Your Honor, an apology is insufficient. This is a catastrophic failure of training, supervision, and departmental culture. It happened under my command, and I will take full responsibility for the investigation and the reforms that must follow. There are no excuses." As he spoke, his gaze flickered for a fraction of a second, moving past Eleanor to the edge of the crowd. His eyes found his mother, Mrs. Helen Hayes, who was watching him, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a look of maternal comfort. Instead, she gave him a single, sharp, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture that conveyed a lifetime of meaning, a mother's vindication in seeing her son do the right thing, coupled with the immense, non-negotiable weight of the duty he now had to perform. He had to fix this. The entire exchange was captured by the lens of Jessica Martinez's camera. The local news reporter, drawn by the viral stream, had been documenting the fallout, recognizing the arrival of the commissioner as the story's apex. She turned to her own camera, her face alight with the thrill of a career-defining story. "We are witnessing a moment of staggering irony here at the Galleria," she said, her voice a professional, urgent narration for the viewers at home. The very officer at the center of this viral profiling incident was, just moments ago, the subject of a civil rights vote, a vote that Judge Washington herself was meant to cast. You simply cannot write this stuff. The reporter's commentary faded, but the reality she described remained. hanging in the air. Commissioner Hayes had offered an apology, but an apology was not a resolution. The power had now shifted entirely to Judge Washington, who would define the consequences. She gave the commissioner a respectful nod, acknowledging his contrition, before turning her full attention back to the man at the epicenter of the crisis. Mark Mitchell stood as if frozen, a statue of ruin amidst the flashing emergency lights. "Commissioner Hayes, your accountability is noted," Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the silent parking lot. "But accountability must also be personal." Her gaze locked onto Mitchell. The analytical coldness was gone, replaced by the measured, dispassionate tone of a judge laying out the terms of a sentence. "Officer Mark Mitchell, this moment presents you with a choice. Your decision will determine not only the trajectory of your own career, but it will also send a clear message about the future of police reform in this county. You have three options." The crowd leaned in, a collective intake of breath. The live stream, now with tens of thousands of viewers, captured the unprecedented moment. A sitting judge, herself the victim, delivering a binding ultimatum to a police officer in the field. "Option 1, Eleanor stated, her voice clear and unwavering. "You submit to immediate suspension pending a full federal investigation under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. You will face potential criminal charges for civil rights violations, the ensuing civil liability, and likely permanent termination. This option protects your constitutional right to due process while acknowledging the profound severity of your actions today." She paused, letting the weight of federal prosecution sink in. "Option 2, you accept a voluntary and immediate demotion. You will complete 200 hours of intensive, externally administered bias training. Upon its completion, you will testify, under oath, before the state legislature about the dangers of racial profiling, using your own actions as a case study for much-needed reform. This option offers a path to redemption through education and public service. Option 3, she concluded, you retire immediately, with your full benefits. Your departure will be an acknowledgement that your mindset represents an outdated and dangerous form of policing that has no place in a modern law enforcement agency. You will avoid criminal prosecution, but you will forfeit any future role in law enforcement or private security services permanently." The three paths lay before him, each one a different kind of abyss. Eleanor looked at her watch. "You have 60 seconds to choose. Officer, your decision will be binding and effective immediately." The countdown began. 60 seconds to decide a life. The world narrowed for Mark Mitchell. The crowd, the cameras, the sirens all fading into an insignificant blur. There was only the judge's voice and the three doors she had opened. Option 1, I lose everything. My pension, my freedom. My kids see me on the news in handcuffs. The image of his children's faces, streaked with tears as they watched him being led away, flashed through his mind. The shame was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. Option 3, I walk away, branded a coward. I spend the rest of my life in quiet shame, mowing my lawn, knowing I ran away, a ghost in my own life. The thought of fading into obscurity, forever marked by this day, was its own kind of prison. Option 2, his mind recoiled from it. I have to stand up in front of everyone, in front of the whole state, and say I was wrong. The public humiliation would be excruciating. He would become the face of bad policing. But then, a final desperate thought cut through the panic. It's public humiliation. But it's not prison. It's a chance. A chance to not be the man who ended his career in disgrace, but perhaps to be the man who learned from it. As Mitchell agonized, Sarah Torres leaned toward her sergeant, her voice a barely audible whisper. He has to take the second one. John, he has to. It's the only way any of this gets better. 30 seconds remained. Mitchell's breathing was shallow. He looked at his hands, at the handcuffs still dangling from his belt. He looked at Judge Washington, her expression patient, implacable. He thought of his family, He thought of his future. The mathematics of prejudice that had driven his actions now gave way to a desperate calculation of survival. His shoulders slumped. The defiant, aggressive posture he had maintained for so long finally crumbled, leaving a broken man in its place. He raised his head, his eyes meeting Eleanor's. He began, his voice cracking, raw with a despair that was utterly real. He cleared his throat and tried again, the words emerging as a hoarse whisper. I choose option 2. I'll accept the demotion, complete the training, and testify about my actions. Mitchell's words, though a mere whisper, carried the weight of a binding oath. They marked the end of the personal confrontation and the beginning of the systemic overhaul. Judge Eleanor Washington gave a solemn nod, not of approval, but of acknowledgement that a contract had been made. The path of accountability, while difficult, was now set. She turned to the waiting Commissioner Hayes, reaching once more into the leather briefcase that sat on the hood of the car. This time, she produced a professionally bound document, its cover a simple, official blue. Commissioner, she said, handing it to him, this situation has revealed a critical vulnerability. An apology is a starting point, but a plan is what prevents recurrence. Commissioner Hayes took the document, flipping through its pages. It was a memorandum of understanding, detailed and comprehensive, outlining a series of non-negotiable reforms his department would be required to implement within 90 days. He read the headings, his expression growing more awestruck with each one. These are not punitive measures, Eleanor explained, her voice now addressing not just the commissioner, but the news cameras and the live streams that were still broadcasting. These are professional standards. She outlined the key points. Mandatory, high-definition body cameras for every officer, with footage subject to regular, randomized review by a civilian oversight board. Quarterly, immersive bias training, conducted not by fellow officers, but by community leaders and civil rights experts. A public-facing data transparency portal, mandating monthly reports on traffic stop demographics, broken down by race, location, and officer to identify discriminatory patterns before they became tragedies. And finally, the creation of that same community oversight board, vested with full subpoena power to independently investigate misconduct complaints. She pointed to a specific clause. Pay special attention to item 4B, she advised. It outlines a peer intervention protocol. It will legally empower and require officers like Sergeant Reynolds or Officer Torres to physically and verbally intervene when they witness a potential civil rights violation from a fellow officer. It will also shield them from any form of internal retaliation for doing so. Good officers must be empowered to stop bad ones. As the commissioner absorbed the sweeping, brilliant practicality of the plan, Eleanor caught the eye of Mrs. Helen Hayes, who had made her way to her son's side. The judge offered her a small, genuine smile. My father always said the strongest walls aren't in the courthouse. Helen, she said, her voice soft and personal. They're in the community. Thank you for being a pillar today. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that Saturday afternoon had become a tidal wave of change. Fulfilling his commitment, a demoted officer, Mark Mitchell, stood before the Texas state legislature. His voice, once used to bark commands, was now quiet and steady as he recounted his own failings, with raw, unflinching honesty. His emotional testimony about the insidious nature of his own unconscious bias helped pass Senate Bill 1619, the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act, a landmark piece of legislation that mandated the very reforms Eleanor had outlined in her memorandum statewide. Judge Eleanor Washington, true to her word, established the James Washington Foundation for Judicial Excellence, a nonprofit providing mentorship and scholarships for young Black attorneys, ensuring the next generation of legal minds would be diverse and prepared. Its motto became a rallying cry: character over color, evidence over assumption, accountability over authority. And the gallery, facing a storm of negative press, became a model for corporate responsibility, implementing its own bias reporting systems and creating a multi-million-dollar fund for civil rights education programs. The story, however, ends not in a state capitol or a corporate boardroom, but in a sterile classroom on a Tuesday morning. Mark Mitchell sat at a small desk, dressed in civilian clothes. It was the first day of his mandatory bias training. He listened as the instructor spoke of empathy and cultural history, but his focus was elsewhere. He looked around at the other officers in the room, men and women of all races, backgrounds, and experiences. For 12 years, he had only seen the uniform, the badge, the monolithic blue wall. But today, for the very first time, he was beginning to see the people wearing it. He was seeing them as individuals.